Hello everybody, welcome into today's edition of Last Call, but different show, still loaded. We've got all the stuff to talk about. Jake's not here yet, he'll join us in a bit, but first we're going to have a conversation about UIndy Sports. Men's basketball, women's basketball over the weekend, and just all sports in general. We brought in Jacob Walton, who works in the UIndy Sports Information Department. He's going to join us for a conversation about all UIndy Sports. Jacob, how you doing today?
Good. Happy to be here. This has been a long time coming. Excited to get talking UIndy Sports, repping the brand however I can, so it's going to be a fun opportunity, and I'm glad to just talk UIndy Sports in general.
So you went to Quincy over the weekend to watch both the men and women's basketball games, but first just tell me about your role in the Sports Information Department.
So I'm a graduate assistant for sports information, so I'm currently the primary contact for women's soccer, baseball, wrestling, and tennis. And I help alongside with Brady with his sports and everything. It's kind of a team effort, but we have our primary contact sports in which we write the recaps for and do all the fun stuff regarding that. But besides taking pictures and doing the stuff I've been doing, but just writing recaps, updating record books, all the fun stuff, basically.
So men and women's basketball, that's not your primary sport, but you went with radio over the weekend. You called it as a color analyst. Let's start with women's basketball. How'd the game go? Obviously, the women get the win. They're now 3-1 on the year. Just tell me about your experience at Quincy.
So first off, I got to credit the Quincy staff, their SID department. Very, very welcoming. They had a really nice arena. Pepsi Arena is a nice arena. But overall, that's a team that this is what you expected out of UIndy women's basketball. Every time a new head coach comes in, it's going to be a slow start. They're learning, your team's learning about that coach, what they like, what's going to be your recipe for success long term. We saw it with Corsaro. Man started 1-7 his first season as a Greyhound head coach. So Mitchell starting out against two tough GMAC teams in that GOVC GMAC Challenge against Malone and a number 5 ranked Ashland team. I don't think a lot of people expected them to come away with wins in those games. But they've turned it around these last two, picking up wins against Northwood and Hillsdale, and then a big statement win against a Quincy team who has an equally new head coach in Casey Bailey, who has been there only for 2 years. This is their second year at Quincy. So it was kind of a cool battle of young head coaches trying to prove themselves in a very tough basketball conference with schools like Drury. You have schools like Quincy who have been good in past. UIndy has had some years to where they're a powerhouse team. So there's a lot of depth in the Great Lakes Valley Conference, and every coach is clawing and trying to find their spot and their wins when they can. And got to give the team credit. They did a great job, and you got to look at it from the two top scorers. Sadie Hill has been consistent in these last 3 games, and I talked with Mark Mitchell about last week what he needs out of Sadie. Sadie had come and scored 22 against, I believe, Northwood. And then, no, it was against Hillsdale, excuse me. Drops 22 there. So that was kind of her awakening this season. She had struggled early on against Ashland. I think she only had 5 against Ashland. Malone, under 10. She hadn't scored double digits yet. So I think Mark and her had a bit of a conversation of the expectations for her as a captain, as a senior, and as the offensive presence on this team that she needed to be Sadie Hill. If that team's going to win, she has to be Sadie Hill. And they did a really good job of that game of facilitating through her. Early in the game, they kind of showed that was their card, trying to get her in the post. As much as Quincy did the same, the game was going to be a post battle. But what nobody could have expected is the second half. Somebody that hadn't touched the floor in the first half, Caitlin Krebs, comes in just on fire. And girl lights it up from 3. Elena Wells takes not 1, not 2, but 3 hits to the head in the game, gets elbowed early on. And if you look at the format of the arena, they have these box seats right underneath the basket. Not a lot of room for players to land. She slams her head into one of those seats later in that second quarter. So Elena Wells pretty much was out of that game. Caitlin Krebs comes in, sees an opportunity, and takes it, and was confident and lights out from 3-point land. Scored 16 in the second half alone, basically willing the Greyhounds to a win in that game. And it was awesome seeing her confidence out there. She's a true freshman for us. So her coming out there, not being afraid to take that shot, and it's reminiscent of what we saw out of a younger Knobloch, and also it's reminiscent of what we saw out of Laura Thomas in years past, that just pure confidence. I don't want to use the word confidence too much, but she had her shot. She had a shot where with a hand in her face takes it, no hesitation at all. And that's something you love to see, especially if she can continue to build upon that. Because like a statement game like that, it's a career high, 16 points, leading your team. If you can continue to build on that, that's a piece that for 4 years, if she can play like that, Greyhounds might be in a good spot at the guard position.
So the final score there was 60-57. The Greyhounds getting that win. Walk me through when it's crunch time. They only win by 3. So at the end of the game, how the Greyhounds did in that set and kind of that part of the game, how Sadie Hill did as a leader. Walk me through kind of the emotions late in the game. Did you feel confident the Greyhounds would pull it off? Walk me through the end of the game there.
With Greyhound basketball, you can never be 100% certain, to be fair. Sometimes games just don't go your way. But I think it was limiting the turnovers. That was something that this team struggled with early on against Ashland and Malone. I know in that Ashland game, they had 10 turnovers in the first quarter, scored 3 points. Struggled. But they were taking good care of the ball. Got to give credit to Maya Scheidt, who took that role as a captain and really facilitated well late in that game, working with Krebs, working with Hill. And they continue to rebound the ball well and not force bad turnovers. There was one play, and it was the final play that Elena Wells played before she got hurt that took her out of the game, where it was a rough turnover, and it all of a sudden is another tight game where, they have the ball with a chance to tie it up. But it was a lot of confidence in their team late to make the right play and make the right decision, and it's learning. And that was one of the things I talked with Mark Mitchell about, was this team has to learn, and they're going to make mistakes early on. But it's about learning from those mistakes. And that's where this team, I think, is going to continue to improve throughout the season, is just knowing each other, knowing each other's limitations. And we've seen 5-6 different lineups so far, from Illinois State all the way up now to Quincy. Seems like a different lineup every time he's out there, because Mark's learning as much as these players are. He's learning what players play well together. For example, a pair that play incredibly well together are Sadie Hill and Lonnie Williams-Harris. Those two play off each other really well in that guard sort of post-player mindset. So you see a lot of them on the floor together, and it's just interesting to see how this team's going to continue to grow. But that's a really big statement win, especially in a close game. It's their second game in a row, winning by 3. So this team has handled that pressure very well.
So they open conference play with that win. They move on to 3-2 on the year. They'll play again on Thursday night, and then on Saturday we'll have both those games right here on UIndy TV for you. As far as the men's team, they also play on Thursday and Saturday coming up, so both those games as well. They were not quite as successful at the end of the game against Quincy. Obviously, you were at the game, you called it as well, same as the women's game. Walk me through how the men's game went. Obviously, they lost, so it was the first loss of the season. They're 4-1 now. 62-57 was that score. How'd that game go?
I'm going to quote our wonderful head coach, Paul Corsaro. Not well. And I know he didn't exactly say that, but that game was the worst game that this team has played this season. There were some bright spots, and it was nice to see Josiah Tynes. If you know me, you know how much I can rant about how much of a weapon Josiah Tynes can be when he's hot. And he struggled early on this season. I think in their first 4 games, he didn't score above 8 points.
He had 15 this game.
He had 15 in this game, and a couple big 3-point plays that really, really kept the Greyhounds in this game, especially when players like Jacoby Robinson and Sean Craig are going cold from 3-point land. And one of the things, in credit Cody Wainscott, he saw the stat in the recap that they shot almost, I think, 50% of their shots from 3-point land. They were consistently trying to take that shot when it just wasn't there. And they were forcing plays, but got to give credit to the Quincy Hawks post players. They were not giving Kendrick Choa, they were not giving David Ija any opportunities in the paint at all. They were really stifling them however they could. And I remember it was probably early in the first half, Paul yelled, "We're going to attack them in the paint," and it just didn't work out for them. The calls really didn't go their way. It was a chippy and contact-filled game, but the calls didn't end up really going their way throughout the contest. And it was just poor decision-making when it comes to turnovers and when it comes to some other mistakes that they made throughout the contest.
Looking at their first 4 games, it was really the bench that came up and played very well for them, right?
100%.
So they came in a spark off the bench and typically outscored the starting lineup. That wasn't quite the case this game. What was kind of the difference here? Why weren't the bench players, like you mentioned, Ija, Bruno Williams as well, Sean Craig missed a couple 3-point shots. Why weren't they able to get going?
It's just a momentum thing for a lot of those guys. Sean Craig has been, me and Cody Wainscott have talked about him a lot, our assistant SID. Sean Craig is the real deal, and he just struggled. And you see he takes some shots there that, man, you might be forcing it there, and it's a hard decision-making thing. And then Bruno Williams, the Lewis transfer, struggled mightily, fouls-wise, turnovers-wise. It seemed like there were some bunnies, as Graham Shear would say, that they just kind of didn't capitalize on, didn't get the easy points. And that's the momentum that you need on the bench And when your bench isn't performing, that forces Paul Corsaro's hand into putting back in Josiah Tynes, putting back in Ben Nickerson, putting back in Jesse Bingham. All three of those guys have high motors, but there's only so high that motor can go. So a lot of the guys were tired because their bench wasn't performing, and Corsaro can't let that game get more out of hand than he did. So it was a situation where some poor performance on the offensive end just resulted in more fatigue, more tiredness, and overall just not a good team effort overall.
They lost starting 7-foot center Julian Steinfeld a few weeks ago to injury. Should be back hopefully here in the next couple of weeks.
He did warm up pretty well. He didn't go through 4 warm-ups, of course, but after talking with him after the game, he said that he should be back relatively soon. It was just a small knee injury. He's not exactly, but it's one of those where he'll just get some rest and he'll be back easily.
How much did the team miss him in the post?
Oh, my God, so much. So defensively, the presence that he has as a shot blocker, he may not be the biggest guy in the world. He's a little lean. But
he is the tallest guy in the world, I'll tell you that.
He's the tallest guy on the floor, and it's not only just his shot blocking ability, but his rebounding. He's developed into a really good defensive rebounder and an even better offensive rebounder. And that's one of the things Corsaro, he was in our office talking about, is in practice, an offensive rebound's 4 points when they're doing their inter-squad scrimmages. An offensive rebound's 4 points. And that's something that Steinfeld has taken and ran with. And he loves getting the rebounds and fighting for rebounds. And there's times where he'll get bullied out of position by a guy a little bit like Kendrick Choa, who's a little bit beefier, I wouldn't like to say, I guess, who's able to kind of push him out of position, but he's able to use his length and his ability to get up to kind of fight off that. But that's a game where, especially with David Ija struggling, Kendrick Choa, having Steinfeld come in, get some boards, keep some possessions going, I think that game maybe turns in the Hounds' favor a little bit better.
Thanks for all your analysis on basketball. Let's switch gears and talk about UIndy's men's tennis team, really making waves in the nation.
Talk about nation, Tom Zuch and Edgar Testua, #1 ranked team in the country, winning the fall championships. Couldn't be happier for those two guys who Tom battled injuries all throughout last season and coming out, and they looked impressive as impressive can be. We ended up hosting the Midwest Regional here, and they ran the bracket pretty convincingly and got to do it the final matches due to rain in their own UIndy Tennis Center. You don't know how much that benefits them in that context, but the confidence that those two had playing together and talking with Malik Tabay, he wasn't even going to put them together going into that tournament. He actually had Tom playing with Jason Gerweck, another one of our seniors, together. I think he's a junior, excuse me. Had them playing together, and Jason went down with an injury or tweaked something, so they had Edgar play. And it was an instant just click, and they play well together, they communicate, and sort of they're able to play the finesse versus power and sort of play off each other incredibly well. And it also helps that Edgar is a heck of a singles player. Edgar, I personally think, is our #1 singles player throughout the season just because of how powerful he can be. He made a pretty good run in the Midwest region for that tournament. So it's going to be interesting to see what those two do, but it's nice to have them ranked #1. They're I think one of the first teams ever to get ranked #1 here. I know we had Dario and his teammate a couple years back win the same fall championship. So it's cool to see the doubles history of this team, which UIndy is known for their doubles players. We had Nikola Alexieva and Anna Novikova a couple years back, #1 in the country. We've won on the women's side the regional championship a couple years in a row. We've dominated doubles, and now the men's side getting a strong pairing like that, seeing the rest of the team take shape with especially some newcomers coming in. It's going to be really interesting to see what this men's team does, especially as we're nearing the season. Their season's coming up relatively soon, so it's going to be interesting.
What's next for this team?
They got conference, they got regular play coming up, matches coming up, and it's going to be interesting to see what the lineup Malik throws out. He has some more people coming in the spring from overseas, of course, because that's Malik's bread and butter, recruiting overseas. And it's going to be interesting to see where he puts people, where the singles looks up. But they don't have a lot of those big matchups early, but they have some big matchups this year. I know they're going to be hosting Western Alabama coming in. I think they have West Florida coming in as well, and I know they have Hawaii Pacific. Those are three of the powerhouses in Division II tennis, and it's going to be interesting to see what they can do long term and stay healthy and stay aggressive. You have guys like Louis Picard, who's a young guy on this squad who plays with a lot of fire, and it's going to be interesting to see how everybody plays together and gels together as the season goes. And I know we're talking about the men's team, but the women's team equally is as good. Obviously, they didn't have the success nationally that Tom and Edgar did, but Anna Novikova continues to be one of the best players in this country. Singles, doubles, she has the history in doubles, playing with Nicole Alexieva for those years, being that number one team. She knows what it's like to be the number one doubles team in the country, and she ends up winning the Midwest region with Sofia Sharanova in pretty convincing fashion. They didn't really go their way at the national tournament, but they made a really good showing. And then someone that I think has the ability similar to Edgar is Leah Karachevic in singles. She made a run in the Midwest region, getting to the finals of that, losing a close 3-set battle, but she has a really good opportunity to cement herself as a top-ranked player in the country. She's ranked pretty high right now. I'm not exactly sure off the top of my head where she's at. But she plays with a lot of fire as well, and she plays with some aggression, but does the finesse well. And that's kind of what you've seen out of players in the past. Talk about the Nicole Alexievas, the Hanna Volikovas, a lot of Ovas and Russian names on this team. But those players that are able to balance the hyper-aggression and sort of the playing back and letting the ball come to you, that Malik and this tennis program is known for.
Pretty successful and exciting season, hopefully, to come up here for men and women's tennis. As far as men and women's soccer, some success, especially on the men's side. Let's start with those guys. Went to the national tournament, fell to Parkside, but tell me about the season that they had. They finished the year 10-5-3, kind of started slow, but really came on of late and weren't able to get it done in the tournament. But it was a pretty successful season, right?
And it was more successful than I personally expected it to be.
Right,
losing Higgins, losing Steinwasser, losing Rashid. They lost a lot of people to transfer, a lot of them going over to Xavier with head coach Higgins, and we wish him all luck. He's done incredibly well over there. But as much as Gabe's a great head coach, it's a similar thing as we talked with Mark. You don't expect a lot of success, but this team battled. They struggled early on, of course, but ended up pulling together. I think it was a 6-game win streak nearing the end of the season. I think their last game of the season, they were holding a 6-game win streak before losing to S&T. But they make a really good run in the conference. They fall early in that GLVC championship, and I was with them, that GLVC tournament. They fall early in that to Lewis, and it was a tough game and a couple of just mental mistakes out of some young guys. They easily win that game without those mistakes. So it's interesting to see where this team goes. They have some really interesting pieces next year. They have Kabru Ghaffar on the offensive end, GLVC Freshman of the Year, an attacker who I remember seeing him the first time I was in the press box statting the game. I see him run across the field, and I look to the guy behind me who's one of the reserve guys, and I go, who's that? Because the guy looked like he just was by far faster and stronger and just bullying guys, and he just hadn't been playing yet. And once he got his opportunity, man, he may not have scored as many as you want for a striker, but he's a freshman. He's continuing to learn on especially a young team with guys like Pierre Leroux, co-defensive player of the year. They have a lot of youth, and they have a lot to build for. And I think Gabe Hall has a really cool unit and a really good unit to build from throughout these years.
It's really exciting how much success they found this year. And like you said, it's a lot of young guys, first-year, second-year players, first-year head coach. It's exciting to see where they can go from here after such a strong base as his first season.
Yeah, and then you look at the women's side of it. It's a lot of youth as well. That team was very young. They had graduated a big class with some big names, of course. Like you talk about probably the biggest name in women's soccer in the past couple of years was Donna Youssef, holding down that back line, being one of the best defensive players we've ever had. Losing her, luckily Ava Kettler kind of slid into that role and developed throughout the season, but once again, she's a freshman. Mistakes happen. Plays herself out of position a little bit sometimes, but that team learned, that team made mistakes, and you saw some early matchups where you're like, this team's right there, and it just learning throughout the season, and there's only so much that your seniors can teach, and there's only so much in that situation. But talking to Holly and talking to Alexi Hardy and some of the players throughout the season, it was just about learning and trying to develop these players where you can. You had players that I didn't expect to do so well that did, like Sarah Wagner had a really good year offensively, netted a couple goals herself. Maria Herrera and Kiki Sauceda kind of worked together on that offensive end. Sauceda was not the player she was last year, but I think it was because last year nobody really expected her to come out and be the best offensive player in the Midwest. and score a hat trick in her first game of the season. Nobody really saw that coming out of her. So this year, the pressure was, hey, stop Sasita. So once that happened, Maria kind of came in, and it became a situation where there's only so much Maria can do when Kiki is getting double teamed all of the time, and Elena Espinoza is coming up and trying to help in that situation. So the offense wasn't necessarily there, but they're continuing to develop. And there was games I don't want to pick on SBU or William Jewell, but there were games to where the team was firing on all cylinders, and it could have been a confidence thing. Of those teams aren't necessarily great schools. They don't put out the best soccer, so maybe the confidence is a little high going into that game, and you're able to transfer that confidence into a good performance. But there's still games against like Cedarville where they pick up a good win, and you see that team develop. And I think next year you'll see that team continue to develop, similar to the men's team, and hopefully they get a good freshman class in with some attackers to kind of fill the roles that you're losing. And Kiki Saucedo, who's graduating, could be coming back as a GA to kind of help educate those young freshmen. That's not confirmed yet. Or Maria Herrero, who they lost at graduation. They're losing Alexi Hardy in the midfield. The only captain they're retaining is Maddie Tice on the back line. So it's going to be interesting to see what that team does long term when it comes to offense and it comes to the midfield.
This year finished 5-7-5, and then lost to McKendree in the semifinal round of the GLBC tournament.
To be fair, a very stout McKendree team, ranked nationally throughout the entire season. That's an offensive team, and that's a game where they barely lost. There was a mistake in the second half where if that comes around, they tied that team earlier in the season. So they very much could have won that game as well.
Let's switch gears. Our final sport today, wrestling. Tell me about how the wrestling team, how they've done so far this year, how they're going to do moving forward. They won both their doubles, so I mean it seems to be going pretty well. They
couldn't have started in a better way. They start with the Kaufman Open, and the story there is Derek Blubot, 197. He ranked number one. He's ranked incredibly high in 197 right now, and it's just interesting to see how well he's doing early on. He's wrestled every match that he can so far, wins the Kaufman Open, and then comes into those early duels we're talking about up in Glenville, West Virginia, wrestling outside, which was really cool for them, and the conditions were weird, and they struggled with that. But he picks up 2 ranked wins against opponents there and really helps will the Greyhounds to 2 wins. They're number 3 in the country. They picked up a win against a ranked Mercyhurst squad up there, so it's interesting to see how this team will develop. But I talked with Worthen, and I talk with Jason Worthen all the time, mainly because I just love talking with Jason Worthen. But he talks about how just talented this team is outside of their top-ranked guys. They have 6-7 guys in the top of their weight class. You have Logan Bailey, who picks up a win at the last tournament they were at, so at the Findlay Open. And it's interesting to see where this team's going to continue to grow, because I know I'm talking about Derek Blueball a lot at 197. Yeah, Phoenix Rogers right behind him. At that Findlay Open, they shared the title, mainly because Blueball beat him for the Kaufman Championship. But it's interesting to see how they got a guy right behind him in Phoenix Rogers who looks ready, who looks hungry. So it's going to be interesting to see if they try to let him down to 180-something or bring him up for a higher weight class. I don't think going up is really necessarily what they're going to do with him, but it's going to be interesting. There's a lot to shake out throughout the season, and the GLBC is a good wrestling conference. The Midwest Super Region 3 is a really good wrestling super region, so it's going to be interesting. They have a lot of returners that look hungry, and they're trying to get some guys next year that are going to help push this team even further. But this is a team that looks scary for a lot of other schools in the conference. You have like Jack Idle-George at his weight class. He looks really healthy. He looks really, really strong so far. So it's going to be interesting to see what they do long term in the season.
What are your spring sports that you're going to be in charge of?
I'll be working with baseball in the spring, and then I'll be helping out as a photographer where I'm needed.
Do you have any early ideas on how the baseball team's going to go? Any early insight there?
Not exactly sure. They have a lot. I keep repeating it. They have a lot of youth, but it's also, you have Caleb Vaughn returning, who was their best offensive player. Mine is Alex Vela, and Alex Vela comes in as a GA trying to teach. So it's going to be interesting. They have guys like Zach Fell playing third majority of the season I've seen so far. It looks like he may be moving over to short, so it's going to be interesting to see what they do with him. Pitching improved mightily. I know we did lose Xavier Rivas to transfer, ended up going to D1 National, the reigning national champion, and D1 to Ole Miss. Really happy for him. Really good guy. Nobody else could deserve it more than he does. Kid works his butt off. So it's going to be interesting what he does. And I honestly think I could see Revis in the league one day, just with how much he works at it and obsesses over it. So it's going to be interesting. But back to UIndy baseball. It's hard to tell so far. I know I've been out to a couple practices. They look to be working hard and trying to develop however they can. So it's just going to be interesting. They got a long home stretch to start the season. So again, some good schools. I know they bring in Grand Valley at some point, which is always a test, even though Grand Valley's not the baseball powerhouse as some schools are. But they also host UIS, which that team is a team of monsters. I remember playing UIS last year. We ended up walking them off in one of the games, but that team seems like every time they make contact with the ball, it's flying out. That team is a lot of hitters. Pitching may not be their strong suit, but man, they hit the ball pretty damn far.
Jacob, thanks for the conversation. Thanks for all that look into UIndy Sports, all the insight there. Appreciate it. It was fun having you on.
Always happy to support UIndy TV and talk about UIndy.